Hey there, welcome to the Confident Chemistry Teacher podcast. I'm Kim, a high school chemistry teacher who's still in the classroom teaching chemistry and refining what actually works with real students. This podcast is all about practical chemistry teaching strategies, labs, and systems that make teaching feel more manageable and more confident. So let's get this reaction started. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Confident Chemistry Teacher. Today I am going to be going over what I include in my chemistry syllabus. Your syllabus is one of the first impressions parents and students get of your classroom. If you do it well, you're going to save yourself a lot of time and questions as the school year goes on. So the idea for this episode is I was asked by some of our newer chemistry teachers in our last planning series, what do you include in your class syllabus? Today, I'm going to walk you through what I put in my course syllabus. One thing I do want to note is I'm a little bit more detailed in my course syllabus than other teachers, and I'll give you reasons as we listen to the podcast. Writing a syllabus is really unique for each teacher, and it can be a little nerve-wracking. For example, when I write my syllabus, half of what I include is mandated by my school district, and the other half I come up with on my own. What I include, my school district mandates, and then the other half is like my personal classroom stuff. So just take that into account as you guys are writing your syllabus. See what is mandatory to include from your admin or your school district. As I go through these different sections that I have in my course syllabus, you might start to think, wow, I think my syllabus is going to get a little long. I do want to give you a little tip that I have is even if my course syllabus is 8 pages, I am going to make sure that I put the most important information in the front. And then if I have to make copies for my students, I'm only going to print off, let's say, the first 4 pages, the most important pages for my students. But I will post the whole course syllabus online so that it is there for students and parents and admin to reference. The first thing that I want to start off with is, of course, the course description. We've all taken college classes, and so this could be really, really brief, again, depending on if your district requires you to include it, or it can be long. In my school district, I'm required to use our course description, but we didn't always have to do that. My course description, if I could write it myself now, would probably be about 2 or 3 sentences. And then I know as a student, I was always interested in what I was going to be learning each quarter. So if you could make a little table and be like, first quarter, we're learning this, second quarter, we're learning that, that would be my ideal thing to include. One thing I forgot to mention, because it's not really part or like a heading in my course syllabus, is at the top of my page, I do put, for example, Chemistry 1 or Chemistry Honors. I'll put my name, I'll put my email address, I'll put my classroom number, and then if there are specific hours when I can be reached, I'll also put those at the top of my course syllabus. So don't forget to include those there because it's super handy to have them at the top so everybody can reference them easily. Now let's get to materials. Whatever you're going to require for your classroom, that you are going to require your students to bring to class every day. Now, some teachers I know require their students to purchase their items. Some the school provides. I would make that really clear in the syllabus. And so generally I do expect, I'm kind of putting quotation marks around there, students to buy their own, for example, spiral notebooks. But a lot of students don't buy their own notebooks. So I do put like a little asterisk in this section that if students are unable to purchase these supplies, to see the teacher, and then the teacher will help them get these supplies. For this is I make it clear that I'm expecting the students to purchase notebooks. And then the day we go to set up our notebooks, if I see that students don't have one, as we're taking that time to set up our notebook, if they don't have one, I will come over and give them one. And actually, before I give them one, I'll ask, hey, do you have a notebook at home? Because they could have just forgotten it at home. And if they say that they couldn't afford it, then I'll just give them a notebook right there so that they will not be behind and they can get their notebook set up just like the rest of the class can. And then be sure to say if they need to purchase it or if it's going to be given to the students from the school. And then I also want you to include what items do they need to bring and have on their desk every day. I think that will also be helpful. In case you're wondering, I do have my kids do 2 spiral notebooks throughout the school year for my interactive notebooks. They need to bring a pencil every day. I'd like them to get calculators, just the scientific calculators. I like the TI 30X2S's. I have a class set of those, so I do tell the kids I do have a class set, but if they want to go home and practice on their own, that is ideally that they'd get one of those. Then, since we do interactive notebooks, I do ask that the kids try to find tape and scissors at home and just let their parents know that they'll sometimes need to be using those. And then once in a while, we will use colored pencils. So that's my list. The next thing to include would be the grading policy. The grading policy is probably one of the first things that students and parents look for because they want to know how their students are going to be graded in the course. So this is one of those sections that I will put towards the front of my syllabus. And in here, you just want to include any information that's given from your district. And then if you get to make up your own grading system, include that information. So depending on what your grading scale looks like, you might include categories, percentages. Here again, and we're going to probably put this in a couple times, but retakes. Do you allow retakes? If you do allow retakes, how many days do kids have to take the retakes? And then be like, if it's not going to be identical, I would definitely put in there, may not be the same test. I'm sure there's a fancier way that you could have said that, but that they will be similar. And then also include in here your late work policy. Now, personally, I'm a little more lenient on my late work policy. Like if they can get it in before I've gotten it graded, or sometimes, especially for my freshmen, I'll probably give them 2 weeks to get stuff turned in, which is like 10 days. Our school policy says 5 days to get it turned in. I always do put the district one in there, but then I know as like a person, I sometimes take assignments a little bit later. I also keep a running list of late assignments and when's their last date that I'm going to take them up on the board. Especially if it's a lab, I'm going to want to get those graded and back to students right away. My school district, we do 80% for summative assessments. So that's really tests and quizzes and then some labs. And then 20% is formative. For me, is some labs go in the summative category, some labs go in the formative. For me, if the kids had to like make a graph or analyze some data and they were doing it independently or in their small groups without me giving them the answer, it's going to go into the summative category. One thing that I think is super important to recognize is whatever policies you choose to follow, make sure that it is consistent from student to student. I definitely have found over the years that students will talk to each other, parents will talk to each other, and you don't really want to get into a problem of showing favoritism towards one student versus another. One thing I do want to note here is if students have been out for a long absence, if they are like living in a homeless shelter, I had that a couple times this year, I definitely will make accommodations and help those students out. So I would say that those would be extreme circumstances, but if it's just somebody wants to turn it in an extra day late, the lab, and you didn't let the other kid turn it in late, that's when you start to run into problems. The next thing you want to do is include brief classroom expectations, a broad overview of you expect the kids to behave in class. Now, this is not the procedure section. I feel like when I see classroom expectations, I'm like, you're going to walk in, you're going to grab your paper, you're going to start your warm up. Mine are always like, be respectful, be prepared, make sure that you're participating, and stay safe during labs and follow school policies in there as well. So just kind of like a broad overview of what you expect. I would also include in this section your school's or your personal progressive discipline policy here. Another section that you can include briefly in here is lab safety. Include some general expectations, like I'd be more specific about like not horse playing here. I would be more specific about wearing proper safety equipment. And then some teachers do include a lab safety contract in their syllabus, but I actually do my lab safety contract as a separate document. So that's just your personal preference. It's, however you choose to do it. And then I also would suggest, I know a lot of people for their safety contract parent signatures, they'll just do a Google form. I really like to still do it on paper. You get to see what the parent signature is. I often will ask for their phone number on there. So hopefully I might get an updated phone number, because if I do have a progressive discipline problem, sometimes the number in the school database isn't correct. And so I can go back to the lab safety contract and find out that information. So just put a little section about lab safety in there. And then any consequences, it depends on how bad the infraction is. But if kids are really messing around, I might have them sit down and do a paper version of the lab, or they might not earn points at all for that lab if they can't behave. The next section to include would be communication. And so you want to include things like how can parents and students reach you? What are your office hours? Do you offer tutoring? Is it better to email or call you? And then like the website or the LMS there that you have. From my personal perspective, I generally encourage parents to email me. And then it's documented what they are saying. But then I personally like to make a phone call home and then respond to their questions over the phone. But I'll often have my database where we're supposed to log parent contact open, and I'll just be like writing down some of the key points like as we're talking, or maybe I'm just like writing it on a sticky note and then I'm going to put it into the database afterwards. I think that phone calls, for me at least, are faster than typing out an email, unless I do use ChatGPT. So sometimes I'm like, I don't want to talk to this parent. They're driving me crazy. So I will literally just put the talking feature on chat and I'll be getting my emotions out as I'm saying this. And then I'll be like, please write a professional and caring email. And then ChatGPT helps me out with that. But I do think that for the most part, phone calls are more personable and they're generally faster. And again, you want to try to build relationships with the parents. Even though they do drive us crazy, they are our allies. So we want to try to work with them as much as we can. The next section you'd want to include are absences and makeup work. Now, if you're a teacher that requires a student's absence to be excused before you accept their absent work, make sure that you're including it in this section. I've seen some teachers get in trouble because it's not necessarily listed in the policy, and then they say, oh, I'm not taking your work because your absence wasn't excused. And I don't do that. But if a kid was chronically absent, that might be something you could pull out of your back pocket and be like, hey, they're absent all the time. They're absent every single test day. They're absent every single lab day. But if that's something that you want to include, make sure you're putting in that. And then we also want to talk about technology expectations in there. So really quickly, something about cell phones, Chromebooks, AI use if your school has a policy for that. One of the things that I'm really big on is in my classroom, some kids will just come in and open up their Chromebook right away. And we probably only use the Chromebooks in my classroom 1, maybe 2 days a week. I feel like when kids are just opening it, they're usually just playing games on there or they're working on something else. So I let kids know that they should only be opening up their Chromebooks if myself as a teacher tells you to do that. Now, this is the part where I feel like you can go either way. A lot of times procedures, you're just discussing those during the first few weeks of class. I actually like to include them in my syllabus. At the beginning, I mentioned that I'm probably only copying off the first couple of pages, the most important stuff. I'm not saying that the procedures aren't important, But I like to include them here because I teach a lot of kids, special needs students. And then even if I have students that aren't in the special needs class, I have a lot of autistic kids, like brilliant autistic kids. And you know what autistic kids, or at least the ones that I have experienced generally like, they like structure, they like procedures, they like to know what's going on next. And so I've gotten several emails from parents saying, thank you for including how to enter the class, how to do the warm-ups, how do you turn in your work here? Because every class is unique, sometimes students with special needs can get overwhelmed. And I just think having this as part of the course expectations, that's what we used to call them. I guess we're going to call it your course syllabus in the new age. But I still like to include all those little details here. And what I'll do is I'll often just print off my procedures section. And then as we're going over the procedures at the beginning of the school year, then I'm like, I don't want to say reading straight from it, but the procedure that I'm giving is the procedure that's matching in there. You say, oh, we're going to do it this way. And then like you have it written down that we're going to do it a different way. So trying to, you want to obviously keep your procedures consistent. Now, you want to try to end on a positive note here. I usually will include, if I didn't include earlier, some tutoring opportunities. I usually do kind of put the tutoring opportunities closer to where the parents are going to sign, just because they'll generally see like tutoring times. Now, one of the things, include is like, when are you available to tutor? But I'd also encourage you to include what other groups on school, at your school, are doing tutoring as well. You might have science clubs that are doing tutoring, but you might not. But I think it's valuable then to maybe include like the math tutoring that you have there. A lot of times kids in chemistry are going to struggle with the math. And again, I mean this with much love. Generally, those math kids that are, doing the tutoring also have taken these hard science classes before. So they could just pop into the math class and be like, hey, I'm struggling with, significant figures, scientific notation. And those kids will know what they're talking about. Now, to end off with a couple of tips, I kind of already mentioned this first one. Make sure that you're keeping it readable. You don't want to put in giant paragraphs in there. I am a big fan of bullet points, of bolding, of putting like little divider lines in those sections, but like bullet points will be your friend. When I write my course expectations, I am writing this thinking that both students and parents will be reading it. So I generally write my course expectations in like the third person. So I'll be like, students are expected to blank. Okay. Parents can best reach, so I try not to like use like you or I or we. Like the class will start the warm up together, or, however you're going to say that. And then your syllabus really should be like an open door, not like a closing the door kind of thing. So I think sometimes when you have a lot of just like rules and here's the disciplinary action procedure, something like that, it can kind of seem intimidating. So if you guys have been following me for a while, you guys know that I am a huge sucker for jokes. So I'll often try to sneak a joke in, not on every single front and back page, but like every front or every back, I'll try to sneak in like a little chemistry joke, just like in the bottom corner, because I think that, at least for me, that matches my personality. And I feel like it brings a little like levity to the situation. And then one of the things that I like to include with is, I don't know if we'd call this a class motto, but in my class, this is my main thing. And, it's not new. I didn't come up with this. But I always tell the kids, it is okay not to know. It is not okay not to try. And so that's just something that I repeat again and again. And then I'll usually put like something right underneath that. I know chemistry can be hard, but I love helping them understand. And I'm hoping that maybe some of my nerdiness will rub off on them as the school year goes. So I just try to end it on a really positive note. I hope you're feeling a little bit better about what to include in your syllabus. And even if you've made a syllabus in the past, hopefully you caught a few things today that you might want to add to your own syllabus. If you still feel like you have some more planning to do, if you're still feeling a little unsure about what you're going to be doing this fall, I do want to let you know about an opportunity that I have coming up this Saturday, July 25th. I'll be hosting my quarter one planning workshop where we'll be going over how to plan, coming up with a planning checklist, designing lessons for each unit for the first quarter. I'm going to leave a link in the show notes here for you. In that 3-hour session, we're going to be figuring out what's the best way to plan for your quarter. So we'll talk a little bit about meta planning, like what do we need to do before we plan? What supplies do we need? But then we're also going to go through what I would consider like the main topics for the first quarter. So we're going to be talking about the nature of science. We'll be talking about scientific measurement. We'll be talking about atoms and electrons. And I'll be sharing what I think are some of the most important labs and activities that I like to do. And then as a group, we'll also be sharing what do you think, because we're all unique teachers and we all have unique perspectives. So I can't wait to hear from our participants. Throughout the course, you'll be getting some templates, and then you'll also be getting some activities that you can use to better help you be prepared for your first quarter. Remember, my motto here is to really help you be a more confident teacher. And what's one way that we can be more confident? Well, we can be better planned. And then, at least for me, I always feel way more confident when I'm walking in with like a really good plan and I can see where we're going in the quarter. I can make sure that I've got my materials that I need. So anyways, I'm really excited to share that experience with you. The cost of the training is $39, but the really cool thing is since this is my first training that I'll be doing, you'll be able to get in at this founding rate. And then as the school year goes on, I'll be offering quarter 2, 3, 4, and you'll be able to keep this reduced rate. I think this will be a really great opportunity, as I mentioned, for you guys to work as a group, to get some ideas from me. This is my 18th year teaching chemistry, and just really have some community and be able to bounce ideas off of each other, because I feel that being a chemistry teacher, even though you might have other science teachers on your campus, chemistry is kind of a specialized subject, and it's just always lovely to hear what other chemistry teachers are doing. If you've got any questions, make sure that you are reaching out to me. I'd love to answer them for you. And so you guys, as always, keep inspiring, keep experimenting, and keep being awesome in your classrooms. Happy teaching!